My daughter cut me off after she had her baby. We don't need you around, the child, she said. When the trust was closed, her husband called me, begging. I let it go to someone else. I arrived at Olivia's front door with trembling hands, carrying a bouquet of white peonies, pale petals, round and full, symbolizing motherhood and forgiveness. A silent hope that I might finally hold my granddaughter in my arms. The cool afternoon light caught the fragile blooms, making them glow in stark contrast to the polished concrete stoop I stood upon. My heart beat faster with each step toward the brass doorknob. Each heartbeat a prayer for acceptance and redemption I believed I might reclaim on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I rang the bell, a faint chime echoing down the hallways inside, and waited, chest tight, breath trembling, hoping her child would widen her arms for me rather than turn away. The door swung inward, revealing Olivia's face first, eyes cold and distant, lips set in a flat line. Then the small face of my granddaughter nestled in her arms, cheeks rosy, unaware of the storm gathering between us. Olivia's gaze did not soften. Instead, she looked past me, as though I were an old photo, someone to view with polite detachment. Then her lips parted, and words came out like ice shards. We do not need you around the child. The words pummeled me harder than any force I could imagine. I stood speechless, a breath caught in my throat, my hands pressing the flowers closer to my chest as though they were me, fragile, vulnerable, unseen. Before I could respond with love or explanation, Olivia snatched the bouquet from my grip. In a motion both deliberate and violent, blossoms flew from my hands as she struck me across the body with great force. White petals exploded into the air, drifting down like shattered hopes and broken promises, carpeting the stoop in wounded beauty. My breath escaped me. The world stilled, then spun. I tried to steady myself, but she pushed me hard, sending me tumbling backward onto the stones. Pain radiated through my back, but the deeper hurt was the sting of rejection, sharper than any physical blow. She did not stop there. With eyes blazing, she flung the ruined bouquet of mangled stems and bruised bloom at me like a weapon. For a moment I lay there, stunned, as petals and broken petals scattered across my body and pooled beneath me, a testament to both my love and my humiliation. "Get out," she hissed, voice rising with venom. "You stink of disgrace and decay. You have no right to appear in my home, ever." The door slammed shut with finality. The sound echoed in the hollow of my chest. No one came to check on me, no apology, no soft whisper from the baby inside. I remained where I had fallen, chest heaving, petals fizzing like ghosts of a life we once shared. My hands shook, and yet I did not cry or plead. Anger rose from depths I had long kept quiet, cold, steady, and relentless. Amid shattered petals, I felt something spark, a quiet fire born in betrayal. Petals lay around me like witnesses to my undoing, but they would become the coals beneath my resolve. This moment of shattering would not break me. It would transform me. Before we continue, if you feel the fire, press hype. Let the quiet rise, let the powerful speak. In solidarity, let that button echo the roar of the silenced. I stayed standing at the kitchen counter long after the heat of that afternoon's confrontation had settled into a dull ache. The white china mug trembled in my hand as steam swirled upward, carrying with it the faintest scent of chamomile and a perfume of longing for unspoken reconnection. Outside, the bird bath brimmed with crystal sunlight, and a solitary sparrow hopped across the stones, pecking at fallen crumbs. Watching it was like viewing a memory of a child, small, innocent, but insistent, reaching out for something deserved. My mind drifted back to a day when Olivia simply stopped cooking with me. Although we always had cooked side by side, I was stirring a pot of fish stew, my hands old but sure, and she walked in, nose pinched. "I cannot stand the smell," she said, voice forced calm but eyes burning. "It reeks of backwardness, like something from a slum kitchen. I cannot expose my friends or my child to that." The words struck like ice-cold steel. The fish stock simmering with onion, garlic, ginger, supposed to be comfort, to be tradition, was now tainted in her mind by I stood rooted, wooden spoons suspended, unable to speak as those words redefined our whole past. Because in that stew was every recipe I had taught her: dumplings, soup, laughter in the kitchen at 2 a.m. while she finished a school project, her leaning over my shoulder, entranced by the aromas. Backwardness, She had discarded me and the love in my cooking with that single breath. I wondered then, had I ever been more than a memory to her? Tears came, but my lips stayed sealed. I remembered mornings when she was a toddler, tiny broom in hand, sweeping up offending oatmeal on the floor, giggling under her breath as she knocked that same pan off the stove. I had caught her with relief, scooped her up with a laugh. A mother's heart, bruised, longing, hopeful, built that moment into a promise that I would protect her forever. Later, when she got sick, in high fever, I sat by her bedside, leaves of green tea steeping, the scent mingling with my skin dry from hours of comforting. She whispered, "You're my hero, Mama." And I believed it until the day Olivia reached across the sink to rub the sweat from my brow and then just stopped talking to me. I followed that memory with another. Her freshman year dorm room, posters on walls, textbooks stacked like towers. I had quietly transferred money into her account, enough for tuition and groceries. I used a code, "From your mother," always, so she would see it without feeling compelled to thank me aloud. Later she called, voice clipped, "Thanks for the money, Mom. That was basically old age money. I feel blessed in a new way now." New way? She had fashioned her life out of the comfort I gave her, then instantly pivoted to a new aesthetic of success, excluding me. That ache deepened when she said, finally, "I love you. But I deserve elegance, not your struggles. Please just let that part of my life fade." Fade. Imagine being love personified, then erased. I folded my hands against the mug, heart tight. Was I too rooted in yesterday? I wish these memories were single shards in a mirror, but they reflect. I remember saving tips from hospital shifts, each dollar I tucked into a tin for her future. When the tin was full, I counted out enough to cover her dorm deposit and a bus ticket home. Standing in that pawn shop, I cried, my fingers trembling as I handed over the pawn, not because I needed the money, but because I needed her to succeed. That was the day I became part nostalgia, part sacrifice, and yet those savings too had become tainted, old-world filial duty in Olivia's mind, a badge of antiquation she gently put down, like a broken dish she no longer wanted to hold. I felt tears gather, but I let them wait. Inside me, a slow throb began, not of sorrow, but of clarity. Love without return is still love, but unrequited love need not be the tomb that ends the story. I set the cup down, cups clinking in the empty room, as I weighed the memory of my sacrifices against the reality of Olivia's dismissal. My life had been the feeder of hers. Now I would feed something else. That kitchen, once humming with lineage, now lay in silence. But from that void, my decisions, my resolve, would rise. I still remember how quiet Olivia's voice was when she told me they had closed the trust fund, the one I started the day my granddaughter was born. I sat on the edge of my armchair, fingers touching the old latch on the wood trim behind me, feeling as though something inside me had been sealed away at the same moment. No thank you. No explanation, just that perfunctory notice. My throat went dry. I felt everything else fall away, as if I'd been erased from the center of their lives. For a long moment I sat in that room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the uneven tick of the clock. Grief, cold, blunt, settled over me. I said nothing. I didn't weep. Instead, I closed my eyes and folded every memory tied to that fund into a fragile breath. Weeks passed. Quiet. Too quiet. The world slowed. I stayed inside, pulling on old sweaters, drinking weak tea, sorting through letters from applicants who had thanked me for the smallest kindness. Then, one morning, I sent an email to Olivia. It read only, "I have repurposed the trust into a scholarship fund for orphaned girls training to become doctors." I pressed send. My heart rattled, but I did not look back. Later that afternoon, Olivia called, the line crackling with tension and confusion. You closed it?" she stammered. "Yes. For our granddaughter?" "No." A rusty silence followed. I could almost hear their shock echo over the wire. Olivia's voice trembled. "Who is it for?" "A scholarship. For girls whose families are gone. Girls who need this more than anyone you know." Her line was silent again. Your head snapped off, pushed into shock, I wondered. I let the silence hold the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about memory. Finally she spoke, voice tight and small. "Why?" I inhaled, My voice sounded brittle but steady. Because you said you do not need me, so I gave it to someone who does. The sentence floated in the abyss between us and landed like a stone. She didn't respond, didn't argue. That was all she needed to hear. The rest of the day passed hazily. In the dim corners of my home, memories bloomed. Night after night I had tucked that money away, just pennies from my nurse's salary, hidden in a drawer labeled for her future. I'd watched that drawer fill over the years, not for recognition, not for control, for love. And to think those dollars would vanish on whim, to people who refused to even ask, felt like the final abandonment. Yet something stoked inside me, something steady. I smiled, not from relief, but resolution. Olivia and her husband forced me away, but in doing so they freed something in me. That money, meant for a child who might never call me grandma, would now build a legacy rooted in tenderness, not entitlement. I began writing checks to a local foundation focused on girls who had lost parents and dreamed of becoming doctors. The first application came from a teenager whose foster parents worked double shifts. She wrote of nights spent under a dim lamp, studying anatomy charts. Another was from a girl in a refugee shelter, describing how she wants to heal the child next to her in line, an image that pulled at my chest. Each envelope held a miracle, made manifest through the small trust I quietly redirected. When I sent Olivia a letter explaining it, I did not ask for forgiveness or acknowledgement. I wrote, "You said you didn't need me, so I gave it to someone who does." I folded the letter within a card, pressed small white petals inside, echoes from the bouquet she threw at me on that porch. Those petals, now dried and pale, were symbols of brokenness turned quiet strength. Weeks later, I heard that Olivia's voice had caught in her throat when she unfolded those words. No guilt turned into confrontation, just emptiness, replaced by memory. It may not have been the closure she expected, but it was real. It was deserved. The scholarship fund grew quietly. My heart, once tethered by hurt, now floated on purpose. I learned that when love is unmoored, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. The money I saved under the radar would bloom in minds of girls who never knew my name, but shared with me what mattered most: hope. A week after I sent that final letter, I received no reply. No knock at the door, no apology. Olivia had always been good at silence when it served her, but this time I no longer expected a response. I had moved beyond hoping for things that only grew mold in dark corners. What surprised me instead was what I began to feel. I walked to the post office each morning. The autumn wind had started to carry a bite, but it was clean and sharp, like truth. I dropped off scholarship documents, signed recommendation letters for girls whose stories I had read through tears. I began volunteering once a week at a local youth center. The girls there reminded me of the Olivia I once knew, the Olivia who stayed up late reading with a flashlight, the Olivia who would bring me dandelions and say they were grandma flowers. That child had disappeared somewhere along the path to prestige and social standing, but here, in this small brick building with flickering fluorescent lights and mismatched chairs, I found traces of her soul. Innocent, fearless, honest. One girl, named Kira, came up to me with a letter she had written for her scholarship application. She asked, "Miss Lydia, do you think I'm good enough?" The question shattered something soft inside me. I smiled and replied, "You're not just good enough, dear. You're exactly who this was meant for." Kira hugged me. No pretense, no performance. Just a real, fierce embrace from someone who saw me not as a tool, but as a person. It was the first hug I'd received in years that didn't feel like an obligation. That night, I stood in the living room with the lights dimmed, sipping warm milk. The quiet wasn't so lonely anymore. I looked at the framed picture on the mantel, Olivia as a baby in my arms, the hospital bracelet still around my wrist. For the first time in months, I didn't ache when I looked at it. I only felt a bittersweet pride. And then came the unexpected. Olivia's husband, Thomas, called. His voice cracked on the line. I didn't know she'd shut you out like that. I thought the trust was still there." He sounded embarrassed, tired. "It's gone," I said, calm but firm. "It belongs to someone else now. But it was for our daughter." "No, it was for my granddaughter, and you both made it very clear that I am not a part of her life, so I chose someone who welcomed me into theirs." He didn't argue, just silence. "I'm sorry." he whispered eventually. I let the words sit. You weren't the one who threw flowers in my face, I replied. I wasn't the one who stopped her either, he admitted. That earned a quiet nod from me, even if he couldn't see it. We spoke for a few more minutes, cordial, reflective. He asked if I might reconsider. I said nothing. Silence has a way of saying no with more power than shouting ever could. That night I sat with my journal and wrote, "They expected me to fade. But I've never glowed brighter." A few days after the call with Thomas, I received a small envelope in the mail. It had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Olivia's, tight and neat, like someone trying too hard to control the mess. My heart skipped, foolishly hopeful. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a single note. You've made your point. We're moving on. Please don't contact us again. No salutation, no signature, no acknowledgement of the pain or the betrayal, just a cold dismissal dressed up as finality. I sat at the table, eyes scanning those few lines again and again until they lost all meaning. Then I lit a match and watched the paper curl and vanish into smoke in the ashtray I kept on the windowsill. I didn't cry, not this time. I had already buried every soft part of me she once knew. What she burned was only ash now. I walked out that afternoon, bought flowers, roses this time, not peonies, not a symbol of motherhood, just a reminder that something could still bloom after frost. I brought them to the community center and placed them on the table for the girls. They smiled. No one questioned why. No one mocked. No one struck me with them. That evening, I reviewed the scholarship essays. There were over 70 applicants now, many from cities I had never been to, girls who wanted to be pediatricians, midwives, nurses, and war zones. I read one essay by a girl named Renee, who lost her mother to cancer and had lived in 5 foster homes by age 16. Her dream was to return to her hometown and open a clinic where no one would be turned away. She ended her essay with, "Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones who gave us life, but the ones who gave us hope." I sent her the acceptance letter the next morning. Later that week, I received a message from the foundation I'd partnered with. They wanted to name the scholarship permanently in my honor, the Lydia M. Carter Fund for Women in Medicine. I agreed, on one condition. The first class of recipients must all meet each other, in person, and hear my story, not the scandal, not the press spin, but the truth. The center agreed. So I stood there, months later, before a room of 17 young women. I didn't wear pearls, I didn't cover my gray, I didn't even try to hide the tremor in my hands. I told them what I had been through, not with bitterness, but with purpose. How love, unreturned, does not make us empty, it makes us strong. How giving without being wanted may hurt, but giving where it is welcomed heals more than any apology ever could. Afterward, Renee came up to me and said, "You didn't lose a family, you built a new one." I smiled. "That's the secret, sweetheart. Family isn't always inherited. Sometimes it's chosen." And somewhere in the silence of that moment, I felt Olivia's absence like a shadow that no longer frightened me. He arrived days later, Thomas, calling softly through the phone again. His apology this time wasn't layered with defense or excuse, it quivered with regret. He spoke of Olivia's resignation, how she unraveled at the company board meeting when news of the scholarship fund went public. "Everyone's talking about it," he said. "They say it was the perfect revenge, silent but absolute." I did not flinch. I only replied, "Justice does not always clamor. Sometimes it lives in quiet decisions. Sometimes it lives in quiet decisions." He asked if she had reached out, then paused, his voice small. "Will she?" I did not reply. That silence was louder than any answer could ever be. Meanwhile, the Lydia M. Carter Fund began to take shape. Each morning I pored over my modest savings, building the official endowment. Each name added, a girl who'd lost both parents, another who cared for younger siblings after school while working to pay tuition. Each name echoed back to me why empathy should never be conditional. I called local clinics and cancer wards, asking if they knew girls with the spark, the grit, the quiet hope to become doctors. One afternoon, a social worker called to say they had a candidate, Marisol, 14, undocumented, whose dream was to return one day and set up a community clinic in rural Mexico. I arranged a meeting, in person, in my dining room with chipped paint and a cozy feel that children seem to instinctively trust. Marisol arrived, shy and steady. She unfolded a list of facts. Good in biology, mother gone, makes tortillas after school to keep her brother in shoes. She looked at me, eyes round, and murmured, "I hate doctors who ask, 'Do you speak English?' first. I just want to heal people." I poured tea, offered her a seat, and shared nothing of my bitterness. When I was finished, my response was soft. "Then you will speak healing, even without words." She smiled, as if that was all the promise she needed. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to speak at a medical student panel on overcoming adversity. I was not a doctor. I had not white coat credentials. But perhaps the world needed to learn that resilience, not pedigree, defines healing. I stood in front of anxious young faces, ages and backgrounds clashing and converging on a shared purpose: medicine. I told them about love that wasn't seen, about floral attacks and sealed doors, and about decisions made in silence that echo louder than shouts. I told them I did not want vengeance that destroyed, but justice that built. They listened. I felt them there, in me, and I in them. Months later, I saw Olivia again. Across a news article, she was quoted, voice trembling, as saying she lost more than just a fund. She lost a mother. The words struck me, but I felt no bitterness. I had moved to a different ground. I understood that to take everything from someone, sometimes you start with what they used to depend on. One evening, I found a message waiting. "I am sorry for everything. I cannot undo it, but I want to know more about what you started." It was from Olivia. I placed the phone down without calling back. I thought about marigolds and peonies, and how flowers push through hard ground when they want to live. I nodded to myself, rising from my seat. I had not forgiven. I had transcended. I never intended to gain power over Kell & Co., but power is one thing you never relinquish fully once you've built it. And once I realized I had, it started with old documents I found tucked away in a leather portfolio, buried behind dinner menus and faded photographs, documents from my days managing rentals and small investments when Olivia was born. Over many quiet years, I had acquired shares bit by bit, initially granted in my quiet years as unpaid labor, then stock options earned from investing small savings into Kell & Co. From the beginning, I was a silent partner, never noticed. Only when I needed to remind them of my presence did I mobilize them, built into a majority held in trust. But then, when that afternoon on the porch replayed in my mind, I paged through the papers again. I noticed stock certificates of Kell & Co., my shares increasing slowly over the years without Olivia or Thomas noticing. I was a silent shareholder in the company they believed they inherited. Over many quiet years, I had acquired shares bit by bit, initially granted in my quiet years as unpaid labor, then stock options earned from investing small savings into Kell & Co. From the beginning, I was a silent partner, never noticed. Only when I needed to remind them of my presence did I mobilize them, built into a majority held in trust. And because I believed in legacy, not entitlement, I had let it remain that way. One morning, weeks after speaking with Thomas, I worked through the phone to contact a lawyer. We used an irrevocable trust to transfer those shares to the Lydia M. Carter STEM Trust, a new entity dedicated to girls diagnosed with learning disabilities who wanted to pursue careers in science and medicine, girls whom the world dismissed, but whose minds burned with ambition. By placing the shares into an irrevocable trust, my ownership and control were removed from my name, unchangeable, unassailable, immune to reversal. I watched the paperwork shift in silent formality, knowing I had pushed the first stone in a landslide. When the news broke, founder's mother revokes control over Kell & Co., redirects shares to STEM Trust. Olivia and Thomas sat at the boardroom table, color draining from their cheeks. I saw it because I read the shareholders update. Olivia's eyes flicked from the screen to a stack of folders made redundant in the second it took her to realize that the control she assumed she held was just an illusion. I did not feel triumph. I felt necessity. Kell's stock began to tumble. A controlling shareholder transferring shares to a trust, stripped of personal profit motive, sent chills through investors. They saw a red flag, interpreted as a lack of confidence in the company's future. Suddenly, trading halted. Murmurs turned into panic. Analysts drafted quick articles. Trust evaporates from table stake. Founders' intent questioned. Offices empty. The market collapsed, as though the company had been parted at the root. I read about it on my kitchen tablet, sipping tea again, at that same old table where dreams of reconciliation once hovered. There was grief, yes, perhaps even sorrow, for the friendship I had thought we would share. But deeper was the recognition that my decision was not rooted in pride. It was for generations that had no voice, for futures that would otherwise be erased. Beyond the financial collapse, something greater unfolded. Local headlines hailed the trust as a beacon of hope rather than a revenge plot. I had built something irreversible, not an empire, but a foundation. I received an email from Olivia days later. "Mom, why did you do this? You hurt us." My response was calm, unwavering, "Because you said you didn't need me, so I gave it to someone who does." She did not reply. Not long after, I received confirmation from the Trust's board. Kell & Co. had agreed to integrate philanthropic initiatives in their strategy: STEM, scholarships, community clinics. My granddaughter's name wasn't on any of it yet, maybe one day. But for now, the company that had turned its back on me was now giving back to those who never turned theirs. Standing in my kitchen that evening, I looked at the place where Olivia once drank milk after school. The place that had witnessed the rejection, the retreat, and now the resurgence of purpose. I poured myself a fresh cup, hands steady, vision clear. Some powers cannot be reclaimed by force, but by faith and quiet action. I did not break anything. I built something better. I had not expected the world to notice, yet notice it did. The video, Olivia striking me with that bouquet, surfaced on social media, immediately detonating across platforms like a bomb. Instagram, TikTok, even LinkedIn feeds were laced with searing commentary and disbelief. Within hours, users tagged the video "granny assault" and "inheritance outrage." Comments exploded in outrage. "Eldest betrayal with petals. She hit her mother. That's unforgivable. What kind of daughter treats her own blood that way?" A snippet of audio appeared under the post, someone whispering, "That's the cruelest daughter of the year." Some called it a crime, some a cruelty of ultimate magnitude. For once, the world's collective heart seemed to sharpen in my direction, not hers. That attention cracked the fragile walls holding Kell & Co.'s share prices together. You see, when the social media avalanche hits, investors turned from cheerleaders into judges. Reputational risk morphed into financial risk. A board deck arrived in my inbox. Before dawn, a flurry of internal memos. Share prices were falling. Institutions were pulling out. Analysts were warning of collapsing customer confidence and a lost brand foundation. Meetings turned from strategic optimism to frantic crisis sessions. By lunchtime, the board, still unaware I had redirected the majority of shares, received word that the scandal would cost the company billions in lost value and credibility. Within 24 hours, the board released an announcement. Olivia and Thomas were immediately removed from all executive responsibilities. A statement read, "In light of recent events and impacts on corporate reputation and governance, the board has voted unanimously to relieve both individuals of their management roles pending an independent transition." It was surgical, not publicized as revenge, but as necessity. Their names, once printed in bold on flyers and sponsorships, were now being scrubbed, replaced by names of more neutral leadership. Then, the PR fallout began. Brands sponsoring Olivia's collaborations canceled contracts, a beauty line dropped her influencer partnership, her curated social media walls lost followers by the thousands. The club of elite moms she once associated with quietly unfollowed, posts disappeared, and hashtags like "mom goals" turned bitterly ironic. TikTok trends twisted her story. She cut grandmother's love, now karma's slicing her future. A week's worth of short clips captured Olivia alone in her green screen sessions. Pausing mid-smile when she saw her dressing room monitor, she looked half lost. I watched all of this unfold not from voyeuristic delight, but from quiet resolve. I was no longer anonymous. I was name on a trust. I stood before a gathering of reporters when the foundation organized a ceremony for the first group of scholarship recipients. Microphones bore down, flashing lights, my hands clasped, steady. A single question volleyed through the crowd. "Miss Carter, do you consider this a revenge or a redemption?" The room leaned forward. I looked at the teenagers seated behind me, bright, hopeful, future doctors. I spoke simply. "I was never your target. I was your backbone." That statement echoed much longer than any highlight reel could. No applause. But silence folded around me like understanding. Back at home, Olivia watched the coverage on her phone, her face liquefied with disbelief. She opened the trust's public statement. Legacy committed. Shares irrevocable. Mission unchallengeable. No pride in me, only shock, regret, and perhaps the slow thaw of memory. She reached for my number. Her finger hovered, but for now, she stayed quiet. Lydia's life continued. I watched as the company scrambled to regain footing. New leadership emerged. My trust was simultaneously a financial instrument and a moral beacon. The company repurposed part of its CSR budget into science tutoring programs for underserved girls, initiatives I had never glared at with ego, but with pragmatic love. Olivia and Thomas retreated behind closed doors, out of the social eye. Mentions of them faded as news moved on, but the trust endured, funding one future doctor at a time, slowly but unmistakably rewriting its legacy. That was the moment the crisis peaked, their public collapse, their professional exile, but mine was a quiet ascent. It was not framed in vindictiveness, but in recalibration of worth. In the stillness after the storm, I realized that I had not just survived, I had become the force of change I never thought I could be. I met Lily behind the aging red crumb brick community center, where the air smelled of chalk dust and hopes just beginning to take flight. She stood there, clutching a paper bag, eyes wide, not with fear, but with the familiarity of someone who had seen me when I was invisible. It was her who once secretly slipped me a sandwich through my mailbox during that dark chapter, when I had been publicly humiliated and banned from the home that used to lift me. That sandwich, plain and unpretentious, had tasted like water in a desert, like a whisper of belonging. Now she stood as the brightest artifact of all that endured. We sat on a worn wooden bench beneath budding cherry trees. The morning sun scattered petals around us, as if blessing what was about to happen. I handed Lily a slender envelope, thicker than she expected. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling just slightly. Inside were legal documents, transferring the holdings of the Lydia M. Carter STEM Trust into her name, allowing her to use the principal whichever way she needed for her tuition, health, or whatever insists on worth. I watched as her breath caught, and eyes welled up. "I never forgot you, Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Tears escaped me then, quiet tears that arrived because love was finally recognized. I leaned forward, drew her into a hug, pressing her small frame against the lines on my shoulders where grief had carved its temporary home. "I didn't lose a daughter," I replied, breath catching, "because I found a granddaughter." The bench settled under us, a soft exhale. I pulled back, taking her face in my hands. Her cheeks were rosy, eyes shimmering, and in that glow I saw futures branching outward. Science labs, white coats, care beyond herself. Everything I had saved, hoping to hand to Olivia, now passed through me to Lily. Not because of obligation, but because of recognition. We spent the afternoon sitting there under petals and sunlight. Lily told me about school, her friends, dreams in molecular biology. I told her stories of the fight that led us here, the flowers, the injustice, the quiet catalysis of purpose. She didn't ask for explanations. Her presence was enough. When it was time to go, I handed her an envelope. She looked at me, questioning. "Open it at home," I said. Later, I watched her feet, padding up the sidewalk with that envelope hugged to her chest like a promise. Inside was a small notebook with a note, "For new dreams, not old shadows." Night fell in my quiet house, but I was wide awake, brighter than I had been in years. The transfer was complete. The legacy was now hers. I had broken chains. I had built bridges. This was the new story. Quiet, resilient, anchored in the hope for someone else's sunrise. We were still family, redefined, but unbreakable. I moved into a modest house on the edge of town, a little cottage painted pale green, trimmed in white, with a garden that waited patiently for spring. The air here is softer, quieter, birdsong at dawn, the hum of bees busy about their work, and the sense that peace can grow when you stop chasing it. I planted flowers along the walk, marigolds and daisies, simple blooms for a simple life. That house, with its uneven floors and cozy kitchen, became my sanctuary, made still richer by purpose. I founded the Phoenix Scholarship, named for the mythic bird that rises from ashes. The name felt right: rebirth, renewal, hope forged from destruction. My lawyer helped me file the paperwork. The trust was now fully institutional, with governance that would outlive me. Each dollar given in Lydia's name would become a flame for girls abandoned by life and lit anew. Inside, I set up my office, a small room with a single desk, a lamp, and a corkboard full of photos. On that wall's center, under glass, I placed the shattered pieces of that once delicate handkerchief. The cloth torn by olive branches and resentful hands now lay preserved in its glass sanctuary. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a testament to survival. Each jagged thread reflected something real. Pain endured, love broken, and then rebuilt, stronger, somewhere beyond bristle. I began receiving applications. Letters, in neat penmanship, frantic typing, sometimes stained, sometimes taped together. From farms, from shelters, from cities on fire with hope. One girl wrote from a refugee center in Bosnia, another from a coal mining town crippled by industry's collapse. In every letter was a spark. They wrote not for pity, but for a chance to heal others. Lily sat at my side, her bright eyes helping scan essays every afternoon. She brought iced tea, and I taught her how to mount the letters on the corkboard. This is my favorite, she said of a letter from a girl wanting to become a pediatric oncologist because she lost her brother to leukemia. She's not asking for pity, she wants to save kids. Lily let me feel proud, not just of someone else's promise, but of what I had become. I realized motherhood had evolved. Motherhood did not end with one's own children. I was mothering hope now, and Lily was learning how to steward it. I held the first awards ceremony beneath the old oak tree in my yard. I invited local news. The girls, 5 of them, stood on folding chairs singing a song together, voices trembling and soaring at once. One girl looked like she had always sung that song inside her, waiting for a moment like this. When she finished, they cheered, and I felt tears on my cheeks, tears of joy that surprised me with their warmth. I spoke. The phoenix is not just about rising again. It is about giving wings to those who otherwise would fall. These girls, this community, are the reason love never leaves us. Afterward, Lily helped me hand out envelope after envelope of scholarship checks. Her hands were steady. She knows now what love looks like when it is shaped by silence and when it breaks through with kindness. Inside the cottage later that day, I stood before the handkerchief display. I ran a fingertip over one tiny thread left intact. I remembered Olivia's face, red and broken, as she fell through her own unraveling. I did not regret redirecting what she would not cherish. There was justice in that act. There was rebirth. Lily found me there, placing a fresh wildflower next to the glass case. She said, "You turned pain into something beautiful." I squeezed her hand, and you helped me remember what it is to hope. At night, I sit on the porch under lamplight and write letters to scholarship recipients. Letters of encouragement and advice. I remind them that their dreams are not liabilities, but legacies. Sometimes I attach pressed petals from the garden. Other times, a short story I wrote when I first learned patience. Lily comes to me when she can't sleep. We talk about her dreams of university, the architecture school she loves, or the idea of working with medical device design to help doctors like those scholarship girls one day become. We plan trips to college campuses, talk of visiting libraries and lecture halls. For once, I am the safe harbor, as much as she is the promise beyond the storm. I look at the tranquil night sky and think, I have gone through erasure, public shaming, betrayal. I have walked through stones of broken love. But love, quiet, patient, resolute, restored me. My story did not end with dismissal. It began again in trust, in flame, in that handkerchief framed in glass, the brokenness that became a phoenix. And so I sit here, finally knowing that even in the aftermath of what was taken from me, everything that remains, hope, legacy, family speaks louder. The story continues, reborn, under stars and flowers, and the unspoken vow that nothing lost is ever lost entirely. I sit on the small wooden rocker stationed beneath the twilight of my balcony, watching the horizon dissolve into shades of amber and rose. The same sky that once felt harsh and unyielding now cradles me in its softness. I turn the pages of my journal, its spine worn but steady, like me. With calm breaths I begin to write. They erased me from their story, so I wrote a new one without them. I pause mid-sentence, lifting my eyes to the colors flooding the sky, then resume with quiet conviction, pen dancing across the page. Each word is slow but deliberate, reclaiming the narrative that once cast me aside. The evening breeze carries with it the scent of late-blooming jasmine from the garden, a reminder that beauty can flourish even near the end of summer. I pause once more, thinking of how far I've walked alone, and how odd it now feels to define my life by absence. Even that phrase seems distant. My story, redefined, no longer revolves around loss, but around endurance, rekindling and love. In forms unexpected. A rustling at the door interrupts my thoughts. Lily, with her backpack in one hand and a cluster of wild daisies in the other, appears in the doorway. Her cheeks are flushed from evening mice and late homework, yet her eyes are bright. "Mama," she says, but I shake my head, indicating she should say Grandma. "Grandma," she whispers, her voice hesitant. "Are you still sad?" The question, tender and small, thrusts through layers of healing I haven't yet fully recognized. I close the journal, tucking it beside me. "No, sweetie," I say softly, meeting her gaze. Tears settle unwanted near the corners of my eyes, but I dismiss them with a faint shake of my head. I'm finally free. She comes to the balcony rail beside me, stepping carefully onto the rocker so our knees touch. I wrap an arm around her shoulders as she gazes at the sky. The twilight has deepened, the pink is gone, and in its place is calm indigo, dotted with the earliest stars. I whisper into that hush. Life doesn't always give us second chances, darling. Sometimes you make yourself one. Ah, she presses her hand into mine and leans her head against my shoulder. We are silent then, watching the first star flicker, knowing with quiet certainty that we belong to each other now. I think of all that was broken, the handkerchief under glass, the trust that journeyed to someone who did need it, the scandal that stripped away an invitation, and how each fracture became a foundation. That broken heirloom wasn't just a memory of pain, it became a stained glass window into a stronger life. The air drifts in soft and cool, carrying the promise of tomorrow. Lily tilts her head and says, "I'm going to build something worth living for. You're not the only one, I think." With that quiet fire in her voice and mine, we stand up. Hand in hand, we step off the rocker and onto the porch floor, leaving the journal open on its page. Inside, my quiet sanctuary waits. Books, letters, the scholarship files waiting on my desk, each representing women whose lives will take shape because one grandmother was erased, but wouldn't vanish. We walk inside together. Lily brushes past the framed handkerchief beneath their protective glass. I see her fingertips catch on the edge of the fabric. I step forward, offer my hand to guide, and as we move past it, I whisper, "We don't live in the damage. We live in the healing." At her side, I feel light, not ephemeral, but rooted at last. That night, I write a closing sentence in the journal. This story ends not with absence, but with a seed planted in love. And that seed is enough. We turn off the lamp. The silence inside is peaceful, an embrace after a long winter. Outside, the night carries a hush that says everything ends, but everything begins again. The phoenix does not ask permission to rise. Thank you for walking this journey with Lydia. If this story moved you, if you felt the pain, the injustice, and the quiet triumph, don't forget to hit that hi button, like, and share with someone who believes in second chances. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been written out of someone's story only to write your own? And most importantly, subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more powerful, true inspired tales of resilience, betrayal, and redemption. Because every grandmother has a story, and some rewrite the ending. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter.